Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the latest webinar from thebusinessdesk.com in partnership with Begbies Traynor. I'm Ben Ormsby and I'm the Yorkshire editor. And today we're going to look at how Yorkshire businesses can prepare for what lies ahead during some, well, trying times is probably the polite way of putting it. Obviously, 2021 was filled with hope. It looked like marking a fresh start for the country. We were free from the EU, the end of Brexit discussions, and a vaccine for COVID-19 was being rolled out. However, as we sit here in January, the country is in its third national lockdown. Rules are changing quickly. Business distress has surged by almost a third in Yorkshire since the end of 2019. And businesses are facing losses of £1.86 billion from invoices going unpaid. How do you navigate that moving forward? And how do you ensure that your business is on the right footing? Well, that hopefully will be what our panel of experts will be able to provide answers to today. I'm delighted to be joined by 5 key experts who will be sharing over the next 45 minutes their opinions and wisdom on what you can do as a business owner and leader to ensure that you're ready to move forward. So without further ado, we'll start with introductions. And just to remind you, there's a question and answer at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions, we'll be answering those throughout. Just fill in the box and I'll put them to the panel. So start by asking you all to introduce yourselves and also tell me what you're seeing as we enter this latest phase of lockdown and what challenges are arising for businesses. I'll start with you, Julian.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Good morning, everybody. I'm Julian Pitts. I'm the Regional Managing Partner for Begbies in Yorkshire and the North East region. Delighted that we're able to take part in this today. I think, Ben, the succinct answer is uncertainty. That is the major factor that we're seeing when we're speaking with business owners at the moment. The uncertainty, which is both pandemic related and Brexit related, to be frank, as well, in terms of supply chain issues that a number of business owners are now facing. So the fundamental at this point in time is definitely uncertainty, and that is the biggest barrier to businesses at the moment trying to plan for the future.
That's fantastic. Andrew, on to you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Andrew Mckenzie. I'm a partner with Begbies Traynor Group. I am based around the Humber area, Hull, Scunthorpe and Grimsby, and also out of the Leeds office. Like Julian, our companies that I'm speaking to and individuals, it's the inability of them to be able to plan with any certainty going forward, how to forecast for the future when they actually don't know what that holds. And if they do take any decisions, they jeopardise potentially future government assistance, which many sectors are entirely reliant upon as they are closed.
Thank you very much. On to you, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Good morning, everybody. My name's Dave Broadbent. I'm the partner that covers the York and Teesside area. I was just picking up on what Julian and Andrew said there, and I think the uncertainty and inability to plan unfortunately leads to a lack of confidence. The one thing that we're seeing a lot when we're advising individuals and directors, anybody who's in business at the moment, trying to actually plan going forward, trying to do it with certainty and have that confidence to actually say, essentially the rule book's gone out the window. Any historic results that you would normally be able to rely on just are non-existent anymore. And again, what each of us will cover going forward as to how we're seeing people almost going back to the drawing board, really, insofar as their own businesses, irrespective of whether they set up 3 years ago or 30 years ago. Everybody's in the same boat.
Carl, on to you.
Thanks. Good morning, I'm Carl Hobson. I look after the corporate solutions team across the north within BTG Advisory. Our 2 main offerings are assisting businesses with raising finance and helping businesses collect their debts. From a funding perspective, in this latest lockdown period, we're seeing businesses continue to access the government support schemes, such as bounce back loans and CBILS. The challenge, of course, is that these schemes close at the end of March. I think with so much uncertainty, it's hard for businesses to know whether they need to access funding under these schemes before they close. And if so, how much will they need to borrow? Finally, the repayments of all bounce back loans and many CBILS will start this year, which needs to be factored into the business cash flow.
Thank you very much. And lastly, Joanne.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Jo Hammond. I'm a director in the Sheffield office. I have day-to-day responsibility for overseeing a portfolio of around 200 companies that are subject to restructuring procedures. And the key trend we've been seeing over the last couple of months is an increase in the level of HMRC debt. I think that's primarily as a result of deferred payments, but also I think there is a lack of enforcement action at the moment. HMRC have had to reallocate resources to the coronavirus response, and I think there is an overriding desire within the government agencies to support businesses through this period. We're also starting to see a number of businesses enter into restructuring procedures where coronavirus support scheme monies have been misused to an extent, and we're starting to get a feel for how the government departments are going to be dealing with these moving forward.
Fantastic. So I think let's start the discussion with, well, as you've all alluded to, it's unprecedented and uncertain times for everyone, and that's no different for businesses. But how do you ensure your business is going to be in the right size and shape for a future that we don't know what it looks like yet? Andrew, perhaps you first.
Yep, sure, Ben. This is a tricky one, as I've alluded to already, as we all have, when there's so much uncertainty. But that's not helpful, of course. I mean, the uncertainty is different in various sectors. If you're in leisure, if you're in, if you're a landlord of a pub, if you're a restaurateur, they really have a big problem in terms of shaping your business for going forward. I mean, all you can do is look at your sector, talk to your customers and your suppliers, talk to your bank, talk to HMRC and your landlord, keep them all in the loop, because nobody knows when the tiers are going to be lifted or how quickly the vaccine may bring us back to a sense of normality. You should always have, and we've alluded to before, I believe, on a prior webinar, always have a cash flow forecast if you can, however complicated that may be, and you should always be looking to look at the cash flow forecast, flex it, budget. It can be a daily or a weekly cash flow forecast, but it should be looking at your turnover. It should be looking at your costs. You can keep your costs, your variable and your fixed costs under review, so you can sensitize that cash flow and look at the shape of your business going forward. As Carl's alluded to, there are things that are coming up within the coming months that are going to add increased pressure to businesses. Future loan repayments, your bounce back loans. I mean, opt in for 10-year payments on those bounce back loans. The CBILS loans, although they've said that they can be paid over 10 years, they can't really. That's a forbearance measure. That'll be on a case-by-case basis. And again, that's ensuring your business is in the right shape. Talk to your funder. The bank may give you forbearance, but it's not the general rule. Be compliant. Look at wages, look at your tax bill. Taxes due has been deferred by the end of March. That can be stretched out over 11 months if you speak to the revenue, but also before the end of March. Just take advantage of the schemes that are available to your local grants. Talk to your advisors, but keep a real close eye on your bank accounts, future bills, and likely recovery out of the COVID situation, as the government announce weekly, bi-weekly their intentions. I won't go into Brexit, but clearly a lot of businesses have been impacted by the Brexit paperwork, the new red tape, import VAT being accounted for earlier at the point of port release. So all these things a business needs to build into its model to get itself in shape for survival going forward. And I think pass that over to Dave now. I think for a few comments, Dave.
Yeah, no, thank you, Andrew. A bit like just picking up on a few of the points that Andrew said there. I think what a lot of people are almost forgetting is that, as well as the COVID pandemic that's going on, we are in a technical recession at this moment in time. When we've given these types of webinars over the years, and we've spoken about being or trying to trade through a recession, the analogy I always give is that the cake has got smaller. Effectively, the amount of work that is out there is a lot lower than what you would normally expect. I mentioned earlier about you're going to have to go back to the drawing board. I think that basically is for everybody. It's almost sitting down with taking it back to brass tacks of what do we do? How do we do it? How much does it cost to do it? How do we do it logistically? How are we going to fund what we need to do going forward? You also need to plan with a prudent pair of glasses on at the moment. Review your current overheads. Andrew picked up on the point then about the fact that you need to speak to your landlord. There's a lot of elements out there that will help businesses that the government have brought in. Things along the lines of that there are laws there effectively stopping landlords from evicting individuals or businesses who have racked up arrears of rent over the period whilst they've had to close during the COVID lockdowns. The problem is there's nothing actually being there to deal with what you do with the arrears. So what we're seeing a lot now is a lot of businesses that have got 5, 6, 7 months worth of rent arrears, and the question is how do we deal with that? You've got to build all of that into your projection going forward, and I think you've got to start at a realistic income stream. You can't base yourself on what's happened historically and say, well, during February this would be our best month. We'd expect to turn over £100,000. You need to shave that down. You need to take 15, 20, possibly 30% off that, and have a look at your business model. Do I need to do something about this? Do I need to go through a restructure? Is it something that we can battle on with? And as Andrew's picked up, a lot of people have projected and just deferred tax, deferred personal tax, deferred the VAT. They've got these bounce back loan C-bills that are all going to come into effect this year. 2021 is going to be difficult, but it's not going to be unsurmountable. And I think the key thing to do is to plan and get that model, stick to it, review it, and try and adapt where you can.
Thank you very much. Dave's alluded to it there that businesses are going to have to start restructuring, and the Begbies red flag report that was published today obviously showed that more businesses are in distress than previously. So, what are the options for businesses restructuring? Julian, perhaps.
Right. Okay, Ben. Thanks. Yeah, there are quite a few things that we look at, but I suppose if I take a step back and say initially, the thing that we always say to business owners is where is your pinch point? Where are the problems coming? Where do you foresee the issues? And then ultimately, the fundamental initial question is, have you had dialogue with those on those pressure points? So if it's the landlord, if it's HMRC, if it's you potentially exceeding your bank overdraft, what sort of discussion have you had to date? Because it's surprising where we've seen in the past how amenable and accommodating people can be if there is communication with them. The worst thing is where people ignore the issue and don't have any discussion. And if they do actually engage with a supplier who they owe their money to, or if they do pick up the phone to HMRC and have a discussion about deferring a payment, it's surprising how positive the reaction can be. So that's the first thing that we would say. Is there some scope to do something informal with individual creditors to avoid having to go down any of the formal routes? Now, obviously, that's all well and good, but for some businesses, the pressure is insurmountable, and trying to deal with a number of different issues at the same time is impossible. And therefore, there are a number of more formal routes that are available to companies. I guess the most drastic is simply liquidation, where the business owner says enough's enough, this business cannot be financially restructured, we can't trade through the issues that we've got, and we simply put the company into liquidation. But it's surprising, actually, having taken that decision, a number of people will then actually say, you know what, I'm going to give it another go, and I'm going to start up again. Maybe I'll just be unincorporated in the future, at least until I've got myself set up again. I might go into partnership with somebody else. I'll effectively learn from the issues that we've had before, and we will reset up in business again going forward. And again, provided that the liquidation is dealt with correctly, there is nothing preventing under UK legislation somebody forming another limited company and setting up to trade again. Clearly, if there are assets of the old company that they want to use, then they would have to purchase those from the liquidator. If there are patents and intellectual property and things like that, that would all have to be dealt with. But that's a bit of a drastic step, but a number of businesses do go through that. What we also see is the use of administration, widely used, obviously covered off in the press a lot, as a means to save a business. Not necessarily the company that has been trading, but the business itself. And I suppose it's fair to say the majority of administrations will lead either to a CVA, which we'll come on to in due course as an option, or a sale of the business. So the business is sold to a buyer. It could be a newly incorporated company. It could be a competitor. It could be effectively somebody associated with the existing directors' shareholders. And actually, a number of business sales are done through the widely known pre-pack procedure, which is a means to try and ensure the continuity of the business to provide the best outcome for creditors, but to effectively try and preserve as seamless as possible a transition from old co to new co. So administration with or without a pre-pack is often a restructuring tool that allows the business to be saved, albeit the company that was trading and has gone into administration will fall away.
Now, that's really interesting. So you mentioned CVAs, and I know Joanne was going to pick up on that, so I'll pass it to her.
So a company voluntary arrangement, or a CVA, is a formal process enabling the compromise between a company and its creditors. To be approved, 75% of those voting on it must vote in favour. And all creditors are then bound, even those that don't participate. It provides for a structure to repay a proportion of debt over a defined period of time, and actually usually via a monthly contribution over usually 3 to 5 years, but it can be a good mechanism to allow a period of breathing space whilst a particularly valuable asset like a property is sold, or to allow pipeline work to materialise. It's a really valuable restructuring tool where there's an underlying viable business that's just suffering from a short-term issue, and where the directors want to trade out their difficulties. The proposals can be flexible and tailored to the business in question. I think we've all seen CVAs used widely over the last few years in relation to retail, leisure, hospitality sector, where it's been used as a mechanism to deal with particularly landlord pressure. But more recently, we're starting to see them being used by businesses that are struggling short term as a result of the pandemic. And I guess, like all businesses out there, we've had to find some quite innovative solutions during this period of time. And within the North East region, we've pioneered a fast-track CVA process, specifically aimed at small, medium-sized, predominantly owned and managed businesses, with a view to helping them trade out of short-term difficulties. I think following on from what Dave and Julian have commented on, I think we're going to see more CVAs as we move through this year, as a result of those pinch points that we've talked about, arrears from things like accrual of rent building up, but also companies needing to start thinking about repaying the support that they've had through the coronavirus support schemes.
I think it's a really interesting point that you've made there. There's going to be a lot of focus on repaying over the next 12 months and beyond, whether it's government support or creditors and things. But how what can you provide? Can anyone provide any tips for how businesses can go about managing their financial resources slightly better, and particularly when we are in uncertain times? Dave?
Yeah, I think the common theme that everybody's mentioning in our webinar now is putting together a blueprint. I think the one thing that you have through any recession, and certainly one that also encompasses a pandemic, cash is king without shadow of a doubt. trying to actually borrow monies outside of the CBILS and bounce back loans at the moment. Carl will go through in more detail, but it's going back to brass tacks and looking at gathering money together, knowing what you need to use that money for, and then using it prudently as possible. I think the cash flow forecast, we've spoken about all sorts of restructuring tools that we can do, but it's almost taking a step back and saying, right, this is where we're currently at this moment in time. We understand our financial current circumstances. What we need to look at is how do we see the future going forward. That should then dictate whether or not we can battle on, or whether we do need to look at some form of restructuring service. At the same time, it's almost looking at the safety of your business as well going forward, because historically you could rely on certain customers, you could rely on certain suppliers. I think what we need to be careful of now is that everybody is in the same boat. So it's not going to take much for certain people to be pushed over the edge. So if you lose, say, for instance, a key customer, a key supplier, that in itself could push us over the edge. It could bring our business down. So we need to make sure that we have a good mix there, and a plan B and potentially a plan C as well at the same time. There are ways and means that you can do that. There are all sorts of part of the Begbies family. We have what's known as a red flag, which you mentioned earlier. This is essentially a database of lots of financial information in relation to limited companies. Doing something as simple as sitting down, going through your top 20 customers, your top 20 suppliers, and doing a health check on them. If there's any issues there, go and see them, speak to them. You know, how are your supply lines looking? How are you going to be able to continue to service me going forward? What work have you got going forward? Certainly, if you're in some of those more tenable sectors, construction in particular, you know, you need to make sure that you've got your supplies coming through. Andrew commented earlier about Brexit as well. I know there's a lot of businesses that are heavily reliant on importing products to then sell to the UK. If we've not got that streamline in place, then we're going to have an issue. But as I say, it's cash is king, and it's just making sure that you get those correct controls in place and make sure that you're going to get, because again, 2021 is going to be a difficult year.
So those controls that you've alluded to, you know, what tips can you provide for, you know, improving that credit control? I guess, Carl.
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly credit control has been an issue for many businesses since the start of the pandemic, and late payments clearly add to the financial difficulties and make successful credit management, you know, more important than ever. I think as we move into 2021, now is a good time for a business to review their credit management techniques. There are some simple processes that can be put in place to enhance cash flow and reduce the issue of late payments. Businesses need to react to changes in working practices, as some customers may still be working remotely and adapting to new processes within their own businesses. It's a good idea to have regular contact with your customers to understand what changes they've made to make sure that the invoices reach the right person. I think at the beginning of the COVID-19 restrictions, many businesses were understandably more lenient towards customers who were having payment problems, which clearly isn't sustainable in the long term. So it's important to have a robust strategy to deal with those late paying customers. This means understanding their current circumstances. So again, picking up the phone to them is vital. It's important to regularly carry out credit checks on customers, as information on their current financial status may require a change to existing credit terms. I think it's also worth pointing out that businesses reviewing how they invoice and how they accept payments. Sending invoices by email may be more effective than using the postal system, and looking into electronic payment methods such as paying by card, which will allow the customers to pay quickly and safely. Obviously, some debts may remain difficult to collect, and the longer that those debts go unpaid, the harder it becomes to collect them. With overdue debts, it's important to engage professional support as early as possible, allowing the credit control team to keep up to date with those invoices that are becoming due, rather than focusing on chasing older debt. Using an experienced third-party company often generates a faster result than chasing them internally. We have the experience of dealing with difficult customers, and typically customers are quicker to pay when they see the situation has been escalated. Our team is always available to provide practical advice on overdue debts to ensure a quick and efficient resolution, so please do get in touch if you've got a problem. I think finally, it's just worth mentioning those businesses that are being turned down for credit. It's worth looking at our newly launched light bulb product, which can improve the credit rating of a business, giving them access to increased working capital. This works by confidentially sharing additional company information with the credit rating agencies to offset any negative data from Companies House.
It raises some really interesting points. The issue of debt that is facing everyone, and particularly, I guess, that around the government support. As was alluded to at the start, we are rapidly approaching March when government support schemes end, and equally, money's going to have to start being paid back or planned to be paid back. Do you see any extensions in the government support schemes? Should we be expecting any? You know, they seem to happen very last minute, to say the least, at the minute. Perhaps Andrew?
Thanks for that, Ben. Yeah. I think if I knew that, wouldn't be doing these calls. But yeah, no, I mean, it's a really good. It is, again, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? There are so many things coming to an end again in March, but as they were in September, October, November last year, and they were all extended. We've got the budget. The Chancellor has a big, whether you think they've conducted themselves well or not, the government, in this uncertain and time. They've got the budget in March, and he's got to square that budget with the debt of 70 billion and rising in just loans alone. So they've got to square that. Court actions stay till the end of March. Will that be extended? I don't know if it will. It's really uncertain. I mean, there's been effectively a stay on court action for all, for winding up petitions, stat demands, etc. Petitions, unless it's non-COVID related debt, which is quite a subjective hurdle to get over, until the end of March. So I'm not sure on the court actions, but it's something that people really need to bear in mind, because I think Joe mentioned it. There's a whole host of companies wanting to take action, as we're aware, from speaking to people, particularly landlords, HMRC. There's pent up debt, and it's going to have to be recouped. That's why talking is so important, talking and budgeting, because you should budget and forecast for these things to end in March. You know, your landlord evictions come back in. I think that's the 1st of April. Furlough, staff need to be paid from the end of April again. Will that be extended? Well, if there is a continual lockdown, I think it will have to be, personally. You know, depending on how the country reacts to the vaccine and how we come out of this, a lot of these, if we continue in lockdown, will have to be extended. If we don't, they won't. But there is a question of how much and for how long. Stamp duty, again, that's created a demand for property. It's seen a property rise. Some analysts are predicting a property fall quite rapidly as soon as the stamp duty threshold is back in place. You've had, under the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act of 2020, one of the provisions was a stay on wrongful trading. That's due to end in March 21, where, you know, certain decisions taken by a director might be looked at more leniently by a liquidator or administrator, should those companies fail as a terrible result of the pandemic. There are other bits and pieces that are coming in and are in already. IR35, the subcontractor rules, that people need to be aware of those, because that's bureaucracy, and if you're not, people may not trade with people who haven't complied, because it's increased administration and risk. The Crown, as Joe mentioned again, you've got to bear in mind the Crown have preferential status from the 2nd of December last year. Therefore, they get their money back first, very crudely. So will they give any more stay of execution to businesses who can't pay them? We don't know, but there still are time to pay procedures that can be put in place, deferments of the tax that you've deferred to the end of March. That is only available to the end of March, the tax deferment for the period of last year. So it's an unknown. There are other things people can look at, like your business interruption policy, which has been better news for certain businesses with those kind of insurance policies. The High Court has ruled that they are valid, so people should be looking at their insurance policies. Force majeure clauses within contracts. But until we know, and it sounds like a bit like a stat record, until we know where we're going, if we're going back into tiers, which we will be, let's be realistic. We will be going back into a tier. We're not going to open the doors and all come flooding back out and, you know, all go back out, cheers in the bar. So yeah, it's tough, but subject to things being lifted, I suspect some of them may be extended, is my answer, but that's only my opinion.
It's interesting, particularly the one when you're talking about the landlord evictions. I know I've spoken to a couple of landlords over the last 12 months who've highlighted the frustration at having those measures stopped. One, in fact, said to me, you know, they don't use it very often. They've used it in the last 3 decades, they've used it once, maybe twice, but that they've found that it's been the bigger companies perhaps who've utilised those measures more than your small independents, who were far more willing to have the conversations, like Julian said at the start, to start actually those negotiations that then made it far easier for them to keep trading. Obviously, landlords, as we said, in some cases have been flexible. HMRC is equally been flexible with payment holidays and such. When do you think this is going to change? At what point do we hit the point when you can no longer keep being nice about it? Is probably the honest answer. Julian?
Yeah, well, I think just picking up on what you said there, Ben, and what Andrew said, there is significant uncertainty. I think that's been the fundamental message underpinning everything that we said today. But coupled with that, the need to forecast and plan, particularly around your cash availability. I think if we look at HMRC, first of all, yes, although at the moment, certain of the forbearance measures are due to be lifted, and there will be a economic pressure on the government to actually try and ensure that tax collections start to ramp up again. There's also going to be the political pressure on HMRC to avoid forcing companies into formal insolvency during this period. So even though there will be undoubtedly the removal of some of the safeguards that have been currently in place, we're still at a situation, I think, for some considerable time moving forward, where a proper structured discussion with HMRC, where there is an ability to pay, but over deferred time, deferred terms, will likely get a favourable response. I cannot see politically HMRC being allowed to start to issue the level of winding up petitions immediately after lifting of the restrictions that they were doing before the pandemic hit. If we look back in time, the biggest issuer of winding up petitions in the UK has always been HMRC. I think there's going to be so much pressure put on them by government. And let's face it, you know, government are political animals, and before long will be forced to listen to the various campaigns for the next election, etc. So, you know, it is a relatively short-term view that they will have. So discussion, planning, what's your cash availability, accrual of HMRC debt, I still think time to pay arrangements, either on a formal basis, a CVA, or an informal discussion with the revenue, is likely to lead to a much better outcome. Similarly, if we look at the landlord, you know, landlords are faced with a real dilemma, because ultimately, if they seek to force the issue and evict, take action, wind up a tenant for non-payment of rent, the reality is, in certain sectors, they are going to be left with an empty property. The challenges of finding a new tenant, the costs of maintenance of that empty property, empty rates liability, etc. It's going to be significant. So again, although landlord evictions will be permitted again relatively shortly, I think you will find that there will be opportunities still for people to have those discussions, those negotiations, and it's about communication. So I think there will still be many possibilities to try and restructure your business without draconian action having to be taken.
Well, that ties nicely into a question we've just received from one of the attendees. How do the panel think that HMRC gaining preferential status will interact with getting CVAs approved moving forward? Does anyone want to go?
Did you want to pick up on that from the CVA perspective first of all, and I can chip in as well?
Yeah, I think what we haven't seen yet is many CVAs being put to HMRC since they gained that preferential status. So there is going to be a little bit of trial and error. In general, what we have seen over the last couple of years is HMRC being more supportive than they historically have been with voluntary arrangements. And I think if it's a well-drafted proposal and it is in the best interest of creditors, would be hopeful that HMRC will be supportive of that. I don't know if any of the others have had specific experience yet in dealing with HMRC in relation to proposals where there's preferential status.
Yeah, well, I think I'll chip in on that one as well. Historically, when we've been drafting CVA proposals, the biggest hurdle has nearly always been HMRC, that to get them to actively participate and vote to agree to a CVA proposal has sometimes been a challenge, and they have often, we found, frustratingly rejected CVA proposals in the past where there have been tax arrears, where they have just acted as judge and jury as such and stated that they felt a CVA was not in the public interest, even though bizarrely it appeared that the outcome for all creditors would have been much better in a CVA. And on occasion there was no reckoning with them. What I think we are seeing now, and we've already seen this coming across the firm as a whole, is that HMRC are more likely to abstain from voting on a CVA and leave it effectively in the hands of the unsecured creditors. Because of their enhanced position now as preferential for deductive taxes, so that's VAT, PAYE and employees' national insurance, I think we will find that they will abstain from voting on CVAs. But yes, in answer to the question, one of the challenges will of course be that the level of preferential claim will be a lot higher in most cases now, and therefore the outcome for unsecured creditors is likely to be less as a pence per pound than otherwise it would have been. But it's still that challenge to try and ensure that any restructuring proposal gives a better outcome than would otherwise be the case. And the better outcome is not only something back against the debt that there is outstanding at the time, but also the continuity of your business and the ability of a supplier to continue to trade with that business and generate profit going forward. So I guess in summary, Ben, yeah, it's a challenge, the preferential status now, but it's not necessarily an insurmountable hurdle.
That's always a positive end there, you know, not an insurmountable hurdle, just a slight one. Well, obviously, as we're looking, you know, we're looking forward through murky waters at the minute because none of us quite know what the future holds. Do any of the panel see any opportunities that could arise over the next 12 months? I guess with businesses that or sectors that might not be having the best of times at present. Would anyone like to go first?
I'll jump in again if that's okay then.
Yeah.
I actually think as we go through in 2021, and as we do see inevitably there will be some lockdown restrictions starting to ease, whether it's going back into the tiers for a period of time, but as the vaccine is hopefully rolled out and there is a return beginning to normality, whatever that's going to be and how long it's going to be, I actually think there's some real positives in certain sectors. If you look at the tourism industry, staycations, the lack of international travel likely to continue for some time. Everybody involved in sort of the tourist industry in the UK, staycations, holiday cottages, catering, hospitality, leisure surrounding the tourism industry. I actually think there's going to be a big upturn potentially as we move forward in the year. So actually, for some businesses who have managed to weather the storm of 2020, and if they are well positioned to take advantage of opportunities, I think there could be a significant upturn for them if they can get there.
I certainly think there's been some businesses that have been shouting that loudly. I know the guys at Yorkshire Cricket, for instance, have said that to me multiple times, that they are living in hope that everyone's going to want to go and watch cricket in all its guises once lockdown lifts. Any other sectors?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to touch on a couple of conversations I'd had in relation to the manufacturing sector over the last few weeks. I think while there's a general consensus that the sector at the moment seems to be running at a much lower capacity, somewhere around 25–30%, there has been the pipeline work still sort of continue to accrue through the lockdown period. And a lot of people are saying that they have that pipeline work there with commitments to move forward when there is confidence that lockdown restrictions have been lifted for good. So hopefully that's some good news in the sort of short to medium term. I think the sector is generally hopeful that the March budget is going to include government commitments, sort of make good on the promises to invest in infrastructure, defence, etc. in the UK, with a focus on using UK suppliers. I think the other thing that might help in the UK, if we can get ahead in the sort of vaccine race compared to the continent, there might be a competitive advantage there. But if you watch the news at the moment, the success of the vaccine scheme seems to change on a daily basis. So I think it's watch this space at the moment.
What about from a funding perspective? You know, is there going to be opportunities for people to get funding to make those acquisitions and to continue to grow? Do we think? Perhaps Carl?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I mean, I think we're already seeing that there are opportunities for well-run businesses to acquire competitors, buy out shareholders, or to embark on a growth plan, especially if they've done well over the past 12 months. Funding is still available for these purposes. A good example is Capable Business Loans, which is available through BTG Advisory. We can access funding from £500,000 to £5 million with three really unique benefits. They're genuinely unsecured, no personal guarantees, which means they complement existing funding providers really well. The term is between 5 and 8 years, which is significantly longer than most banks would want a cash flow loan repaid. And there are no early repayment penalties after 2 years, so the business can refinance if they want. Interest rates on that product are between 6 and 12%, so please do get in touch if you'd like to know more. I think another opportunity for funding could be from any successor to the Bounce Back and CBILS schemes. There's some speculation as to what will follow, but I think we anticipate that there might be some form of regional focus to ensure that the funding supports the businesses in the areas that have been hardest hit by COVID. This may utilise existing providers such as the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund, and it's worth noting that the fund was allocated an extra £100 million in the government spending review in November last year. Another way of providing regional focus would be to give additional funding to the likes of Finance for Enterprise, Business Enterprise Fund, Acorn Fund, or even provide it direct to the local enterprise partnerships.
I think it's good to know that the funding's there, and actually that the money's around to help support those businesses that have managed to weather the storm. I guess any other tips and things you see as an opportunity for businesses over the next 12 months and beyond? Perhaps Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Yeah, to be honest with you, I think a key word that we've been hearing a lot is adapting. I think a lot of businesses have realised that the common theme throughout everything is going back to the drawing board, looking at your business with a new, fresh pair of eyes, but also adapting. I think the event sector itself has been hit quite hard, certainly with the inability of people to be able to mass group together. So, of course, what are we doing now? We're doing an online webinar. This is a classic example of what people are now doing. So it's looking at your business and thinking, well, how do I adapt? How do I change it so that I can embrace this new online world? Similarly as well, a lot of people are changing how they work. Again, a lot of people are not jumping in the cars, driving into the office at 8 o'clock in the morning and then leaving at 5 o'clock. They're doing small amounts of time in the office, more time at home, making themselves more productive. 4 or 5 hours worth of work during a day on a webinar is a much more productive day than spending 4 hours driving around to various sites as well. So certainly, I think there are going to be a lot of winners as well coming out of this. I think what it is doing is it's making people have a good look at the business and think, let's review, how can we improve? And if that requires a reduction to then get back again, so in other words, a reduction perhaps in overheads to then take on a new income stream, then that's what people are looking at doing. But the guys at Joe said that there are numerous examples where we've come across where people are doing pretty well out of it. So it's not all doom and gloom. I think the one sort of key point that we're saying is just take that advice, speak to your accountant, get those cash flow projections in place, get that plan done, communication is king with everybody, speak to your suppliers, speak to your customers, review and adapt. And I think it's just looking at trying to get through this next 6 to 12 months as best as you can.
No, I think that's a view that everyone's taking in every avenue of life, whether it's life or business at the minute. I guess we've had a question from someone who wanted to know if they wanted to get in touch with any of the panel to speak about a consultation or to have a discussion about what's available to them. What's the best way for them to get in contact with you? Does anyone want to volunteer?
Yeah, I mean, our Begbies Traynor website has links to all of us, and I think we're all accessible via LinkedIn and all of the different mediums. So certainly I'd point you to our website. That will have links through to each of us in our respective offices. So we're more than happy to have any discussion, formal, informal, any time of the day or night. We're used to dealing with situations that have a degree of pressure and urgency about them, but what we will do is try and give the best impartial advice for the best outcome for all stakeholders.
No, and I think I'll bring it to a close there. But thank you very much for your time. I think it's been clear that although we are in uncertain times, there are options still available for businesses, whether it is the funding opportunity or the restructuring avenue. But there also will be some winners moving forward. So perhaps we can all look on the silver lining of what has certainly been a terrible 12 months. But thank you again for joining us. Thank you for being part of the panel, and please visit thebusinessdesk.com for a full write-up and a video of this webinar, which will be live next week. Thank you very much.